After the break, Olivia O'Leary and guests examine the question raised in that film in Shoot to Kill, The Issues. This is Thames Television in London, and now Olivia O'Leary and guests examine the question raised in Shoot to Kill. They look at the issues.
Good evening. If you've been watching the film we've shown last night and tonight, Shoot to Kill, you'll want, as we do, to pursue some of the questions it raises. What's the truth behind the Stalker affair? What was the policy of Northern Ireland police, which ended in the deaths of 6 people? Was John Stalker right to pursue his inquiries as far as he did? And was there a conspiracy to remove him? With me to discuss these points are Ian Gow MP, the chairman of the Conservative Backbench Committee on Northern Ireland, Seamus Mallon MP, Deputy Leader of the Social and Democratic and Labour Party, David Trimble MP, the legal spokesman of the Ulster Unionist Party, Larry Cox, Deputy Secretary of Amnesty International, and the director of the film, Peter Kosminski. But first, what about the idea of telling a factual story as a drama, a so-called drama documentary? Is it an acceptable way of revealing an otherwise untellable truth, or is it a dangerous mix of fiction and of fact? Peter Kosminski, why didn't you make what's known as a straightforward documentary?
Well, it was impossible, and we tried. The original idea was to make this as a documentary, and that's what I basically do. I am a documentary director. But all the people we would have wanted to interview were either dead, in that they were shot by the RUC in 1982, they had disappeared and been given new identities, or they were still serving policemen and weren't available for interview. Equally, the incidents themselves weren't filmed, so it would have been a very strange documentary without interviews or pictures. So what we did instead was we researched it as a documentary. The 3 researchers were normal documentary factual researchers. We prepared a research brief that ran to something like 150 pages plus appendices, and then we presented that brief to an experienced writer who turned it into drama.
So, briefly, is there anything in there which didn't happen?
Absolutely nothing.
Ian Gow, an acceptable way to tell an otherwise untellable story?
I question your use of the word factual in your introduction. The former Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, Sir John Herman, has said that so far as he is concerned, it is inaccurate. The Royal Ulster Constabulary has itself issued a statement saying that so far as it is concerned, there are many factual inaccuracies. Although it was, in a sense, a gripping drama, I deplore the making of this film, not least because the events which it purports to describe have been the subject of one of the most prolonged examinations and inquiries ever, the subject of statements in the House of Commons made by the then Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and by the Attorney General, and a consequence of this film, which should have been directed, if you're going to make a film of this nature about Northern Ireland, against the real evil of the IRA. This examination has put into the public focus once again criticism of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and there will be an impression that the Royal Ulster Constabulary has been engaged, first of all, in wrongdoing, and then in a cover-up, and I don't believe that either was true.
Well, are you suggesting there shouldn't be criticism of the Royal Ulster Constabulary?
I am saying that at this juncture of our affairs, that I believe that a consequence of the making of this film will to give encouragement to the IRA and discouragement to the Royal Ulster Constabulary.
Peter Kosminski.
Well, I think Mr. Gow is right to draw attention to the statement made by Sir Patrick Mayhew, the Attorney General. He made a statement to the House in January of 1988 in which he said that the Stalker and Sampson inquiries had found evidence of a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice within the RUC in 1982. However, he, with others, had decided that it was not in the public interest to proceed against any of the officers involved. Now, as journalists, I think we rightly question that decision. It's a free country. We see the emergence of that kind of questioning in Eastern Europe. We welcome it there. we're questioning it here. And this, to me, is a perfectly legitimate exercise of journalistic questioning of a rather puzzling decision.
David Trimble?
It's perfectly legitimate, of course, to question and to criticise where appropriate. But what is wrong with this film is that it paints an entirely false picture. I am quite sure that the impression that will be left in a lot of people's minds after watching it was that there was a shoot-to-kill policy. But yet what Peter Kaminsky has not conceded, and which he ought to concede, is that both Stalker in his interim report and Sampson in his final report both said unequivocally there was no shoot-to-kill policy. Now, on the matter that he referred to about Sir Patrick Mayhew's statement, let's just be clear about this. When he talked about a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, what he was referring to was the cover-up of intelligence sources, which had been revealed to the public a long time previously in the court actions involving Robinson and the other police officers. Those cover-ups were revealed not because of Stalker's activities. Let's be clear about that. It wasn't Stalker that broke the cover-ups, nor was it blurted out by Constable Robinson as that film portrayed. The truth of the matter is that the cover-ups were detected by Sir Barry Shaw, the Director of Public Prosecutions for Northern Ireland. Now, this film gave a false picture about what happened. What happened, in fact, was that the Ulster legal system worked, and worked effectively. Stalker himself contributed nothing to the inquiry into the cover-ups. Indeed, Stalker's
Well, I mean, one must
contributions-
point out, of course, that the Stalker-Sampson inquiry was never published, so we don't exactly know what, indeed, it did find. Peter Kaminsky.
Oh, yes, Mr. Trimble is right to say that Stalker in his book has said that he found no evidence of a shoot-to-kill policy. However, I would point out, as the viewers may have noticed in the closing credits of the film that's just ended, that Stalker's deputy, Detective Chief Superintendent John Thorburn, the former joint head of Manchester CID, and Stalker's number 2 on the inquiry, who carried out the inquiry 4 days a week for 2 years on a day-to-day basis. Stalker only came over every 2 or 3 weeks as required, was the consultant on this film. He's expressed himself happy with the result. He endorses the result. Now, it's for the viewer to say whether the film implies that there is a shoot-to-kill policy, but Thorburn, who helped write both the Stalker and Sampson reports, is happy with it.
It's not a question of implying. The phrase which I think is going to stay in a lot of people's memory is Stalker shouting his head off about death squads in a banana republic. And that is a very clear statement of there being a shoot-to-kill policy.
Yeah, well, I think there's one thing that no one disputes after watching this program, because it is a matter of central fact. First of all, 6 people who were unarmed were killed in circumstances where they could have been arrested by the use of minimum force. That's fact number 1. Fact number 2, they were killed by a special service unit, which was trained to act with speed, firepower, and aggression. That means only one thing, especially put in the context that they were put in by their superior officers. 3. Fact number 3, that the evidence was fabricated by very senior police officers. That was established and admitted by the Attorney General in the House of Commons. Fact number 4, the Attorney General refused to prosecute those people on spurious grounds, and very spurious grounds indeed.
We can argue on both sides of this issue. I'd like to get on now to, I think, one of the substantive issues that we really should discuss here this evening. The question of how much force is necessary, how much force is reasonable. And David Trimble, if I could start with you. I mean, the European Convention on Human Rights requires the use of lethal force only when absolutely necessary. The law in Northern Ireland talks about reasonable force. Looking at these special service units, described by Deputy Chief Constable Michael McAtamney, and he described them as trained in firepower, speed and aggression, to shoot at the trunk of the body, to put a target permanently out of action, to eliminate the threat. Does that sound like a group which is going to use reasonable force? Is there not a danger there?
It is reasonable force in the circumstances. And let us emphasize that phrase. It's reasonable force in the circumstances. It's nothing unusual about the law in Northern Ireland. It's the law in the United Kingdom as a whole. And the circumstances are the circumstances which may exist presently in Northern Ireland and also exist in other places as well. And you have to look at them against the light of the fact that it is the duty of the security forces to effect arrests. And then you look at the question of effecting arrests and say, what is the reasonable force which has to be used in that situation in order to effect the arrest? When the bit comes down to the bit, now this is important, Libby, there is no significant difference between the European Convention and British law.
Right, but I mean, to ordinary people, is it reasonable force to shoot 109 bullets at a target, as happened in incidents, for instance, like that shown in the film involving Toman, Burns and McCare? Is that can I get an answer? Is that reasonable force?
That was reasonable force in those circumstances. It doesn't mean that you're always entitled to open fire when someone breaks through a roadblock. It depends on the circumstances. And the circumstances are those which are believed to exist by the members of the security force exercising the lethal force.
And a situation in which a police officer within less than 3 feet of his target pulls a car door open and shoots 4 shots.
When you're dealing with people who you believe to be dangerous terrorists, who have proved themselves to be dangerous, who you have reasonable grounds for believing are armed and are likely themselves to use lethal force, this becomes necessary. And there's no breaking that fact.
I mean, how can you square up those facts? Number one, Toman, it was shown very clearly in the film, and it is a forensic fact, that Toman was shot through the side door of the car from very, very close range, as was Seamus Screw. Now, nobody disputes that. But the reality of the situation is that in these 3 incidents, the people who were killed were under the... let me finish, please. Were under the closest surveillance possible. The police knew exactly. The police knew exactly what was going to happen. And yet, what was the net result? In the Ballinary case, they got it wrong as to who was in the shed. In the Armagh case, they got it wrong as to who was in the car, as was exemplified by the fact that they expected Dominic McLinchy to be there. And in the Craigavon case, it was shown very, very clearly through forensic evidence in that film, very accurate forensic evidence, that they were not shot in a car chase. They were not shot at a roadblock. They were shot by a policeman when the car had stopped.
Right. Is your argument that as long as the security forces believed themselves to be in danger, then the force was acceptable?
It's not just a question. It's got to be an honest belief and a reasonable belief. It's not just a question of believing themselves to be in danger. Sorry, what I emphasized is that they have a duty to make arrests. It's not just a question of self-defense. I think people very often forget that.
Compared to the case of Stephen Waldorf in London around the same time.
And it's not something unique to Northern Ireland, nor is it something unique to these 3 cases. There have been scores of cases.
I think scores of cases.
But reasonable to make arrests. I mean, was an attempt made to make an arrest?
Yes.
When?
When they were chasing the gentleman concerned, when they were chasing those cars and then opening fire on them. Those were done in order to arrest and to capture those persons.
I think you've got to remember
that's
that
right.
4 officers of the Royal Ulster Constabulary were tried for murder. All 4 were acquitted. In the 3rd case, which we're examining this evening, the Director of Public Prosecutions concluded that there was no case for bringing another prosecution for murder. But 4 RUC officers were acquitted.
Is not the pattern many times when these cases arise in Northern Ireland that self-defense is the accepted defense? And is there not the danger that there will be many people in Northern Ireland who feel the security forces can always hide behind that benefit of the doubt and behind that particular defense?
Look, in this case, 4 police officers were tried for murder. And if your allegation is true, that they used unreasonable force, that they had no reasonable belief and no reasonable justification for what they did, then they would have been convicted instead of being acquitted. And in the 3rd case, the Director of Public Prosecutions, who is a totally independent and very highly respected person indeed, decided that there was not sufficient evidence to bring a prosecution.
The point is that we don't know what happened, to go back to the original point. We can't judge how fair those trials were, how accurate they were, because we know that there was conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. There was an investigation set up to look into it that might have gotten the facts. The results of that investigation, I'm not distorting anything. The results of that investigation were never published.
We've gone through this business of what that perversion of justice actually meant. I want to get on to another point, and it's this one, Ian Gow. During the film, and it's a comment that's often made in Northern Ireland, people did say, does John Stalker not realize what it's like here? Does he not understand what the daily threat from terrorist violence is? Does he not realize this is very different from Greater Manchester? To a certain extent, should people be surprised if this sort of force is used? Is it very different in Northern Ireland, and should one accept that methods will be different?
It is dramatically different in Northern Ireland, because mercifully in Great Britain, and here are we sitting in London, we do not face that threat which is faced by people every day in Northern Ireland. And Seamus was saying to me earlier this evening that one of his constituents was murdered in his own constituency yesterday. So it is dramatically different. Now, the former Chief Constable has said that so far as he is concerned, much of the film is inaccurate. But it would certainly be a perfectly valid point for Sir John Herman or any other Chief Constable to make when explaining the position in Northern Ireland to a Chief Constable or a Deputy Chief Constable who has come from Great Britain, that the position in Northern Ireland is different. And I may just add this, that even as we are sitting here, I think it is very important that we try to understand what was in the minds, in my opinion, legitimately in the minds of those police officers in Northern Ireland on these occasions.
But surely the central point here is that you have juxtaposed right throughout the film is a difference of ethic within policing. You have the stalker ethic, which by and large represents the ethic of policing in England, Scotland and Wales. And you have a different ethic as represented by Sir John Herman and Flanagan in that film. An ethic which has been bred in a very difficult situation in the north of Ireland. I went to see the police the following morning after the Seamus Green Roddy Carroll incident. I was told by the Chief Superintendent and the Superintendent in charge of that area that it was a routine operation. Now, they were man enough to come and apologise to me later and say they didn't know. Now, those were the men in charge of policing in that area who didn't know what was happening.
Right. Can I put some of the points, though, that Seamus Mallon has raised to you, David Trimble? I mean, the question of, are there two different ethics, two different ways of doing things?
Of two different ethics.
And was John Stalker naive
he was
expect that he could conduct an inquiry in Northern Ireland in the same way that he could have in Greater Manchester?
He was extremely naive. He was clearly a fool. That has to be said. There are not two ethics.
Why a fool?
There is very clear integrity running through policing in Northern Ireland. Where he was foolish was in not appreciating particularly the sensitivity of intelligence matters relating to terrorism. We were dealing here with issues of life and death, where you had agents, not just informers, agents inside terrorist organizations who had to be there. And it was quite legitimate to try and place agents inside terrorist organizations. And they absolutely had to be protected.
But are you saying that he should not have pursued an inquiry properly, asked all the questions that needed to be asked of the right people?
That's no problem with that.
But then he had to ask the questions you're talking about.
But there comes a point, and this is where he should have realized, that when you're moving into the area of intelligence, you have to tread very carefully indeed. And John Stalker did not tread with the appropriate care. He went in foolishly. And he created problems where the problem should not have arisen.
You mean he didn't know when to back off?
David, you know that the problem didn't arise until it came to the question of the tapes in the Ballinary Heshed.
It's the questions of intelligence.
And those tapes were not all UC tapes, they were MI5 tapes.
Let's get back.
Once it got into the MI5 realm, once it was seen that authorization for that had to come from the top politically in Britain,
because the intelligence, you're right.
I'm going to move to Peter Kosminski on this issue. David Trimble has said that he feels that John Stalker was naive in not understanding the way he should have conducted his investigation and the sensitivity of certain sources of information. Do you think he was a fool?
Well, sadly, he went further, as you say, and he called him a fool, and John Stalker isn't here to answer for himself, so I'll be a very poor substitute for him. John Stalker was not and is not a fool, nor was John Thorburn, his deputy. They are extremely able and intelligent people, and frankly, I would request that you withdraw that allegation against them. What they do...
Well, having asked him, right, do you want to? No, he doesn't. No. Okay, go on.
Well, I regret that. I think there's no need to descend to the level of personal abuse. He disagrees with you.
Not personal abuse, it's a judgment.
Well, all right, it's not one I personally accept. I think Stalker has a view which a lot of people in this country share, and for what it's worth, after 3 years of investigation, I share, which is that it is not foolish to feel that there should be a difference of approach between the terrorist and the forces of law and order in a state. And frankly, although the forces of law and order in the state are under maximum pressure in Northern Ireland, and they're under a great deal of pressure on the mainland here now as we speak, with the outrages that have taken place perpetrated by the IRA here on the mainland and in Germany and on the continent. that is the time when they have to exercise maximum restraint. That is the time when they have to look to their moralistic laurels. Now, that may sound po-faced and rather sanctimonious, but it is the measure, it is the way in which outsiders judge our civilization, the way we hang on to the tenets of our civilization under maximum stress. If
Right.
John Stalker felt that to be the case and said so, and that makes him a fool, I'm a fool, and I'm with Stalker too.
Can I move, Ian Gow, to one of the points that John Stalker did raise? And it was a concern about the use of informants, the worry that sometimes by using informants, they can end up using you and they can end up becoming agent provocateur. How can one organize the use of informants, or is there a way in which one can organize it so that they don't end up
Well,
using
you could never be absolutely certain about that.
So what's the answer?
And, well, you can only, as the policeman on the ground, make the best judgment that you can in the light of all the training and knowledge and experience which you have had. And certainly, the use of informers has always been a particularly delicate and difficult matter of judgment by the police concerned, and particularly so in Northern Ireland. I just want to add one point. I think there is no basic difference in ethics between the Royal Ulster Constabulary and
Yes.
police forces over here. What there is in Northern Ireland is a dramatic difference in danger and risk.
Right.
That is the difference.
Right. Larry Cox, on the question quickly of informants, is there any way in which they can be used but do not end up acting either as agent provocateur or using the very forces who are using them?
I'm sure there are ways that can be used, but the use of informants can never justify the kind of violation of basic human rights that we saw in the film.
Right.
That's the danger. Once you get into this murky area where in the name of national security, in the name of secrecy, in the name of fighting terrorism, you allow yourself to begin to violate human rights, you not only don't defeat terrorism, you begin to contribute to it, you begin to spread it, you begin to fuel it, and you begin to help the very people that you're supposed to be
A quick
fighting.
question to you, because we're coming towards the end. Lessons learned from this whole affair, reforms that should be put into operation. What do you think?
Well, the first lesson that has to be learned from this affair is that you must follow the very basic minimum international standards when there's a killing of this kind or killings of this kind, which means there must be a thorough, prompt, impartial investigation, and the facts must be made known. If the facts had been made known, we wouldn't be sitting here having this debate. We would know what happened. We wouldn't rely on a television film to tell us the truth. That's the most important thing.
Right.
And if this film is correct, no, let me
Yeah.
finish. If this film is
Quick.
correct, and what happened on the film happened in reality, there must be a judicial inquiry into it in order to stop it from happening again.
David Trimble, and I want to get everybody else in
The
on a
facts
final say,
did-
lessons learned.
The lesson that was learnt was that the system worked, the facts became known, thanks to the way in which the Northern Ireland authorities operated. They became known before John Stalker came into the situation, and this film has not told the truth. It has told a lie.
But Ian Gow, mistakes were made.
Oh,
What
yes.
lessons can be
Oh,
learned?
yes, because the inquiry itself, the Stalker-Sampson inquiry, did find that there was evidence of a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice on the part of certain officers in the RUC. Now, that is inexcusable.
Right.
And it's quite wrong. And
Right.
the reason why we had the inquiry was so that we could learn the appropriate lessons, and those lessons have been learned
Right.
by the present Chief Constable.
Seamus Mallon.
The final point is this. If there is going to be, if there is a necessity for an inquiry, then it should report to someone else other than the people,
Okay.
other than the people who are under investigation.
Gentlemen, thank you all very much. And these issues, of course, are going to be raised again and again in the context of Northern Ireland. And while they may not indeed be settled, they should be discussed. But that's all we've got time for tonight. So good night.